last Monday's commentary was about Bloomberg. Another billionaire gets in the race. And I just thought it was so funny that Bernie Sanders, who used to talk about millionaires and billionaires, and all of a sudden he just talks about billionaires, doesn't talk about millionaires anymore. Billionaires are the problem. Millionaires are not the problem. What changed? It came out that Bernie Sanders is a millionaire.
Well, This Week in Common Sense is underway with Paul Jacob. And the first piece at thisiscommonsense.com this week was Billions of, by, and for Bloomberg on Monday.
I've thought this whole time that Joe Biden, you got to be kidding me. He's run for president all these times. He got elected vice president because Obama said, I got to pick somebody who people will think is safe and, not ruffle any feathers. And he picked Biden and, it worked out okay. But Biden's never been a good candidate. And I do think he's up in years. I think it's pretty obvious when he's been on the debate stage and in interviews, he's not quite as sharp as you might want the president to be. And that's sad. It happens. We're all getting older, even me, unfortunately. And but I don't see Biden has any shot. And of course, Bloomberg presumably would go after the same people. But there's something about Bloomberg. He won 2 terms in New York pretty handily. And then when it came time for a 3rd term, he had pledged when he first ran that he would not do anything to overturn term limits, and he would protect term limits because the council in New York, the way their initiative works, which is screwy, same thing's true in Washington, D.C., where voters overwhelmingly voted for term limits, and then the council just repealed them. But in New York City, it's the same way. The council can repeal what the voters have passed. And what they did was to grant Mr. Bloomberg and themselves 3 terms instead of 2 when he was hitting that 3rd term. But what was interesting is he had something of a sacrificial lamb coming against him. And here's this billionaire. He's supported by a lot of Republicans in the city. He's got the Democratic nomination and ballot line in New York, the way you can have different ballot lines. And he's just a shoo-in for re-election. Not so fast. Tremendous pushback in New York City. Kind of shocked, I think, the powers that be there, the New York Times, wow, much closer than expected. And the issue driving it was term limits. And not just that there was support for term limits, but that he had shown himself to be such a phony and so much in favor of his own power to serve an extra term after he pledged he wouldn't do it, and to do it against the will of the voters of New York City. He ended up winning razor thin margin. He spent $183 a vote, the most ever spent by someone in New York City. At that same level, if he runs for president and has to spend $183 a vote, if he got, as I pointed out in the commentary, if he got the same votes Hillary Clinton got, it would cost him $12 billion. And the good news for Bloomberg is he's got it. He's supposedly worth $53 billion, so he'd have some to spare, good chunk of change left. The bad news for Mr. Bloomberg, Hillary lost. So I just think it's such a non-starter. And then, of course, I think it was today, Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts, jumped into the race. And I didn't see his announcement, but someone told me that he had referred to it as throwing Hail Mary from 3 stadiums away. So, he realizes he doesn't have that much of a chance. But it's just so shocking that at this late date, you've got in a hugely crowded, 20 plus Democratic candidates, and some are starting to get out, and now you've got new people jumping in, and new people who, frankly, I don't think are very popular. Not popular. You could make an argument that Bloomberg would somehow have a good shot against Trump, but he's not that popular in the Democratic Party. he will activate every Second Amendment activist in the country, or supporter, not just activist, to vote against him. I don't think he's a very formidable candidate at all. I think he's almost a sure loser. And so it's really strange, because we've just had an election in 2016 in which you had two candidates that were so unpopular. And, Trump's got 60% negatives, according to some polls, huge negatives, according to every poll. And yet he wins the election. And so you in essence know that, if those polls are accurate, he's getting votes from people who don't like him, which means they don't like the other candidate even more. And that's the thing. There was a poll that came out, I believe it was last week, that said 58% of Americans believe Trump will win re-election. If they were to guess, they're going to handicap it. They think that Trump wins re-election. And obviously that doesn't mean he necessarily does, but that perception is out there is huge in terms, I think, of voter turnout and how the election goes. And here is this guy that, I think if you were to say you can vote for President Trump or you can vote for the Democrat, generic Democrat, that the generic Democrat wins because of the negatives for Mr. Trump. And yet you start plugging them in. And can Elizabeth Warren beat Donald Trump? And you see the polls that say all of them do. But you also realize all those polls also said that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And we just live in interesting but very strange times. And so who knows? I think it's easy to look at this coming election and say anybody could beat Trump. And the truth is, I'm not sure anybody running in the Democratic field can beat Trump. It's just bizarre. And of course, we're going through all the impeachment, and frankly, we have not talked a lot about impeachment, just because we do a short commentary every day, 250, 300 words, and to go into all the nooks and crannies and different arguments and evidence, and it's just very difficult to do. And I don't think it's really that essential as to what's happening. Now, if I thought Trump's crimes were more serious, and it doesn't mean he's a nice guy or that I agree with all of his policies, but I'm just not sure that there's enough out there that's not in the weeds that this is going to have that big an impact. And it certainly could have an impact that hurts him, because it's a lot of negativity. I have an old saying, it can always get worse. So it could get worse for Trump. At the same time, I think it's very dangerous for the Democrats, because at the end of the day, I think it's likely that they impeach him, that the American people are not really solid on he did this thing that I really don't like and that deserves impeachment. I think they're not going to be really quite sure what he did. And it's still going to play out, but that's kind of my guess at this point. And so you've gone through all this, and after going through all the Russian stuff, and it's not that there wasn't some damaging information that came out, I think, from the Mueller investigation. It's just, at the end of the day, I don't think they're the kind of things that a voter hangs his hat on in the voting booth and says, this guy, has to go because of he was impeached for these reasons, because I think the reasons are not going to be very clear to people. And of course, the Senate is almost, the likelihood that they're going to then remove him from office is about 1 in a zillion. So, again, very strange times, because here is an impeachment of a president going on that I think a lot of the country is not engaged in. And of course, doesn't, the truth is, so often we're usually in debt. We're policing the entire world. We can't get out of any of the wars that we've gotten into. The feeling is, yeah, maybe in 2 or 3 decades, 50 years, 100 years, we have to occupy all these different places on the globe. Um, we got some serious issues, and yet it doesn't seem like we're arguing so much about that. In fact, today and this is a complete kind of tangent point, but today I'm fixing some coffee and I'm listening to the news this morning, and they're kind of joking about how little wall that Trump has actually built, and that's such a key argument that he's made, and that what he's really done is to improve and reinforce Obama's wall. And I kind of thought, oh, wait a second, Obama had a wall? So it's like, it just gets curiouser and curiouser. And of course, Obama was putting up a wall. Now, when Trump says he wants to put up a wall, it's a terrible, evil, horrible idea. And frankly, I don't want to put up a wall. I don't want to put up a wall because I think it's a silly way to keep people out, and because I have an inkling of fear that they might someday use it to keep people in. And I say that somewhat jokingly and flippantly, but it's a real thing. And anyway, it just seems to me that here again is the insanity of our system, where people who have supported building a wall act as if it's the most horrible thing in the world, at the same time that Trump is claiming to be building all this wall that he doesn't appear to be building. He's reinforcing Obama's wall, but it's like which liar is the biggest liar? Which phony has the most damaging phoniness that could hurt us? These are the kind of decisions that American voters have to make. And it's why, when the question is, which candidate will hurt us worse? Which candidate will be more embarrassing? Which candidate will be more corrupt? It's hard to vote in such a way to, really help the country.
And doesn't it seem like the Democrats are proving Trump's initial point about how much of a swamp Washington, D.C. is? I mean, does it seem kind of swampy and dirty politics to be taking somebody out in the way they're doing it? Isn't this liable to actually solidify his support in that manner?
I'm not sure it does in that manner. I mean, I think someone could make that argument, but there's no argument that has to be made that Washington's a swamp. So anytime a politician says it's a swamp, people can disagree with that politician, but across the spectrum, from the far left to the far right and everything in between, just huge majorities say, yes, of course it is. And I think it is true that the Democrats' decision on whether to impeach Trump or not is 100% determined by what's going to be good for them personally, for their personal political career. And then when they get together in caucus, they kind of aggregate, or how is our career, how is our power going to be either sustained, improved, or diminished? And they make the decision whether to impeach a president on that. In the very same way that Republicans will, you hear all this, and you always hear it. I think it's because the media is a lot more left. But so you hear it more about Republicans. But you hear, when are they going to jump ship on Trump? What would do it? What terrible thing would he do that would finally get these horrible Republicans to jump ship on them? It has nothing to do with what he does. He could shoot somebody on 2nd Avenue or whatever avenue he said, 5th Avenue, in broad daylight. And that would not be enough for Republican incumbent politicians in Washington to say, we're dumping him. If a poll after he shot someone said that the American people might be inclined to dump them if they didn't dump Trump, well, then they'll dump Trump. Again, the Republicans are making exactly the same calculation. What should I do, with the goal being to help myself politically as much as possible, and having nothing to do with justice and so on. And maybe the one exception to that is Justin Amash. And I disagree with Justin Amash. And I won't quibble that he's looked into it more than I have. because frankly, I just don't see where I add much value in that debate, in that investigation. I'm not investigating. I don't, when I think of what I'd like to read, I'd rather read something about the history of Taiwan or Hong Kong or Catalonia than delve into impeachment, because I think it is all political. But I do think Amash reached his decision trying to do what was best, not just for himself. Because if he was doing what's best for himself, the best thing for him to do in terms of if he wanted to just stay in office is to salute Trump and avoid a primary challenge in a district that's going to lean heavily Republican. But the reason I disagree with him is that I think the bar I would use on impeachment is much higher, in the sense that I think you have to look at the long-term impact on our body politic. And I think going down this whole impeachment road is just creates a divide that becomes very hard to repair. Trump people, and of course, Republicans, maybe not in the same degree, but in the same philosophy, certainly tried to nullify Obama's presidency. Certainly were not willing to go along on certain things and let's find common ground. So this is not like, oh, the Democrats are partisan. Thank goodness the Republicans are never partisan, because of course they are. And they did some of the same thing, at least in attitude-wise, if not in degree, to Mr. Obama. But I think a Trump supporter, and I know a lot of these guys who, they're not in love with Donald Trump. They don't agree with him on every issue. They have a long-term view of Washington that it's a corrupt swamp, and that somebody needs to go up there and bang some heads together and stop the corruption. And they think, even if they think Trump is kind of a blowhard, and if they would never say things or do things in the way he's doing them, they see him as somebody who will stand up to that power, who maybe because he's got money or because it was, is somewhat questionable, they haven't seen his tax returns, but seems to have money, certainly is willing to take a beating in the media to fight the way he wants to fight, which I think Republicans really always feeling like the media, and I think correctly, is on the other side, largely correctly. They like that. And so it seems to me that this will, it creates a situation where you're going to have a 35% maybe of the country that feels like if they elect a president who's bucking the establishment, who's an outsider, the establishment in Washington, the man, the deep state, is not going to let that person be president or do anything or get away with, get their agenda even out there, because they're going to be just dealing with incoming the whole time. I don't say that that's exactly the analysis of what's happened here. There is some cause for investigations and so on. So it's not the Democrats just woke up and we're going to impeach no matter what it is. Oh, what can we think of? But there's an element of that, and there's a desire to nullify this presidency. And my God, we're less than a year away from Election Day, and it just strikes me to be so much better to have this decided by the voters at the ballot than be decided in the halls of Congress. And if Congress was a more representative body, it might not make that much difference. But Congress is a horribly unrepresentative body. So that's that. I think, I just think this could have some long-term implications that I would have to be convinced that are so damaging to the way we live together and can work across different ideological lines, that the bar ought to be a little bit higher. And I have to say, personally, and I do think that Bill Clinton's crime, and a lot of people say, what, having sex with, and of course, Bill Clinton lied under oath in a deposition in a civil lawsuit that was going after him for what was really grotesque sexual harassment. Having a state trooper bring a state employee to your hotel room, and then allegedly Bill Clinton exposed himself to that person and suggested that they engaged in a sex act, and they left. That person being Paula Jones, who was viciously attacked then. Saturday Night Live did a thing making fun of her. She was trailer trash. It was not the Me Too movement. It was, how do we just viciously attack this woman? I think she was very courageous. She stood up for herself and said, to hell with you, and left, and then came back and sued him. But that, I'm going to lose my train of thought here, but that,
well, Trump's doesn't compare, I presume.
Oh, but so they had a real cause to take it to impeachment. It was an easy to explain. People were in jail for doing the same thing. But when I look, so at the time, not that I was, they need to immediately impeach. I was busy doing term limits and other things. That wasn't where I was spending my mental energy. But I didn't think it was outrageous that it went to that, even knowing that the Senate was not gonna vote to convict him. I look back on it and I think it's just, this is a dangerous tool to use without some serious stuff. And you look back at like a situation with Nixon, they never had to go to impeachment. There was enough there. He knew he had to resign. And if you're going after a president for something that the president thinks he can outlast in the court of public opinion, maybe you don't have enough. And I look back at it now and am more critical of the Republicans for taking to Clinton to impeachment. Not so much because, these were completely ridiculous charges, but just that I just think the bar for that is a little bit higher. It's a serious thing to, in essence, nullify an election because of the bad behavior of the winner, whether it's 3 years later or the next day or whenever. I just think you want to avoid it if you possibly can. And I think both in Bill Clinton's time and today, even more today, but in both times, both instances, the drive to impeach was not thoughtful. It was politically motivated. It was, this will help us win elections. It wasn't, we must do this to save the country. I know the speeches where we must do this to save the country, but that was BS.
Paul's commentary appears daily, 5 days a week, at thisiscommonsense.com.